Okay, Joy, you gonna kick us off?
Yeah, here we go, everyone. So, welcome to our second edition of Career Pathways. Um, I know some of you might have attended our last Career Pathways, but we have different alumni, which means it's going to be slightly different than last time. So, we just really wanted to give you a big welcome, and we'll be diving in to the different career pathways that your MTM degree can take you. So, today with us is Verna. Who's our executive director, and I'll let her do her little intro.
Okay, so I'm Verna Rodriguez. Some of you have already met me. I'm the executive director of the MTM program, and I've got 40 years in med tech. And I've been teaching up until this year for the last 7 years, both Santa Clara and here in bioengineering departments. If you have any questions or anything that come up during our presentation, feel free to use the chat. And I will let Joy take it away and introduce herself and background.
So Verna comes to this program with a huge 40-year experience in medtech, and I come to you with about 16 years, so not quite as much, all in higher ed administration. So I'm here to help you from being an applicant, when you're a student, when you're alumni, all that fun administrative stuff. I'll help you. So that's me. We can go ahead and move on. So that's me, and I want to give you a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. So we'll talk about the data and the trends, um, our MTM career pathways. Most importantly, you've probably signed on to hear from our alumni. So our alumni will share their stories, and we'll have time to ask all of your burning questions of how they've used their MTM degree to get to where they are today. And then we'll go over a few different more resources of what the program offers in terms of professional development opportunities and resources. So you've heard from Vern and I about our backgrounds. We wanted to show you where where our students come from and their backgrounds. So before coming into the program, you can see that most of our students have either a life science background, engineering background, or are practicing clinicians. You'll see that not only they come from different backgrounds, their different backgrounds will also help kind of navigate and dictate the different career paths that they want to go into, which is why we have a whole presentation on it because they have diverse backgrounds and diverse career goals. So that is what we're going to jump into today.
So since 2012, our MTM students have become leaders, innovators across all sectors of biotech and medtech, healthcare companies and consulting companies. And our alumni have launched startups, they've advanced technologies as engineers, as scientists, in management, and across all kinds of top companies as well as startups. So this chart highlights some of the pathways that our students have gone on to. So you can see that with the backgrounds of the students, a lot of them go directly into more technical um, because it really still emphasizes their undergraduate degree or they even if it's another graduate degree, what they have in terms of deep technical background. But you can also see that folks go into academia, further academia, positions, education, healthcare itself, as clinicians. And then a lot of these roles are product manager and project manager. Those are two different things. Product being more marketing oriented and project management being more administrative focused in terms of running a new product development team. Entrepreneurship, medical affairs positions, research, um, clinical research, regulatory and quality. So those are very common career sectors for our students. Also, drilling down, it's important to kind of think about the different sectors within the industry. So, think about what you love to do and what you're good at doing. And some of these different pathways might really resonate with you. So, looking at the medtech device industry, we're drilling down a layer. Pharma and diagnostics and digital would have very similar, if not even the exact same titles. So I'm not going to go into every single different pathway, but this one is an example. So um, you can see that there's individual contributor, leadership, such as management roles, context support, which I'll go into, technical, clinician innovator, if you've got a clinician background, and entrepreneur, which all of different backgrounds of our students go into. So I want to talk a little bit about the context roles because these are actually pretty broad. And those different roles are called different departmental areas such as clinical, clinical research, sometimes clinical ops, clinical operations, quality, regulatory, um, risk management, often under the quality organization, business development, preclinical marketing, and also portfolio planning. So let's look at some of the MTM alumni positions. This shows you a breakdown of how alumni job titles fit into some of these categories, management, technical, clinical, etc. Um, and so just a note is that you'll look at these percentages and you will say, well, this doesn't quite equal 100%. So some categories here are doubled, such as senior um, R&D engineer would also probably be doubled in terms of a management leadership role, just as an example. So you can see that some of the high percentage areas are these manager and engineering roles. And this is a snapshot from 2025. So, and I would guess that these might shift a little bit too, as the therapeutics track is a new track in our program just this year and last year. And so we might tend to see more scientists, folks going on to medical school, et cetera. But you can see um, it's weighted towards what I just mentioned, but a lot of folks go on to med school, being a clinician, PhD, etc. And I would assume that probably even more students might go on for research and PhD, especially as we have this therapeutics track, because if you look at job titles and requirements, for those job titles in the life science, drug delivery, drug companies and pharma, a lot of those in the scientific roles require a PhD as opposed to the med tech industry. Um, so I'll let Joy take it away in terms of talking about the different common industry pathways and job titles associated with what I just presented.
Great. So as Verna broke down within each sector different roles, we wanted to kind of give you a little sampling of actual career titles that our alumni hold within each of these areas. So under product management, so this is really the intersection of business, technology, and user experience to strategize and drive the vision, development, and market launch and improve the company's product. Um, Under clinical research, so this is the branch of healthcare science that determines the safety and effectiveness of the medications, devices, diagnostic products, and treatment regimens intended for human use. Under consulting, MTM students have really, really well suited for these types of roles. So you support clients in the development, marketing, positioning, regulatory strategy of their products. And under technical, this is a little bit more self-explanatory for most of you, but there's lots of different types of technical roles, right? You're doing the building, the designing, the testing. Um, so some of these job titles are not as common, such as clinical engineer, but most of those I think you kind of already understand.
Yeah, and also if there's any titles that come up that you want to ask about us later, just jot them down for Q&A because a lot of these titles aren't necessarily known to folks as you're coming into the program.
All right, so under medical affairs, right? So you're really bridging the gap between companies and medical professionals. You communicate all the scientific and clinical findings. That's a great role that some of our clinicians that come into the program have gone on to take. In terms of regulatory and quality, so in regulatory affairs, you're really assisting in obtaining and maintaining government approval for your drugs, devices, and products. So very crucial um, role. All right, under I think sales and marketing is pretty self-explanatory, right? You're helping launch and market these products. And then entrepreneurship. So you're becoming founders, you're part of that C-suite. A lot of this is like that startup area and arena that a lot of people have the idea that they're going to go into at least some point in their career. They have this little inkling of maybe I'll do a startup, maybe I'll be a founder. And you'll hear from Jai Wei in a little bit because that's what he's gone on to do. So these are some of the common job titles, but we also want to kind of break it down by area. So as you saw, the students come from different backgrounds. So we're going to give you example first jobs after MTM from someone with a engineering undergrad, for example. These are some of those common job titles, mostly in the technical sphere, but not all of them. It just depends on what they're interested in and learn about throughout the program. So if you come to us from a life science undergrad background, you're going to be doing a little bit different type of roles, right? So you're looking at, could be looking at product manager, research associate, business process analyst. These are just slightly different than the ones that come to us straight from engineering undergrad. And also, as we mentioned, we have a lot of clinicians in our program. So they go on to do things that are more related to medical affairs, but also they go on to um, entrepreneurship as well. So these, so this is a sampling of companies that employ our MTM grads. So this is a current sampling of companies of where our alumni are at. So you can see that there's a very broad range, right? From very large companies like Roche, Genentech, and Stryker to startups like Hinge Health. We also see some small boutique firms to large firms such as McKinsey. And then there's also a plethora of universities and governmental agencies. So this is just a small sampling for you to take a look at, and you'll probably recognize some of these big, big names. And we also wanted to share with you some data about our job placements race. So this is for our most recent graduating class. We usually survey the students about 6 months after graduating, just so we get the most complete data. So this is the class of 2024. So within 6 months of graduating, 84% had accepted full-time offers, and 16% of that graduating class went on to become founders in C-suite positions. So Jaiwei is part of that 16%. um,
Okay, so let's make this even more tangible and give you a sense of some roles by talking to our alumni. Um, how about if each of you, starting with Maxine and going across from left to right, could just introduce yourselves? Just we'll spend about 5 minutes here, so maybe if each of you like just take a minute or two, then that would be great. I will turn off screen sharing so that we can see them all.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. I'm Maxine. Oh, did my camera freeze? Hi, I'm Maxine. I graduated class of 2024. I'm currently an analyst at a life science consulting company. Particularly what I've been doing is focused around market access and commercialization, which I think I really, really liked about the program. That's something that gave me a lot of direction in terms of what I wanted to do. Like, I really wanted to do commercialization. I really liked the end stage, product launch. Those things were really interesting to me. And so, a lot of the work I do currently is product pricing, reimbursement, talking to insurance, and figuring out how they will cover products, and things of that nature. And so I think MTM gave me a really good baseline, especially in terms of understanding the regulatory landscape and how money moves through the healthcare system. I feel like I didn't get that context at all in undergrad, and I'm just really grateful that I was able to get that in MTM because it gave me like definitely a leg up in terms of understanding the work. Consulting isn't, I guess, it has a learning curve. It isn't easy to get into, but it definitely made it easier having all that knowledge.
Great, thank you. I think Ziza is next.
Hi everyone, Ziza Phillip, also a graduate of the class of 2024. Currently, I'm an investment associate with the American Heart Association. So essentially, I work as an investor for startup companies. A lot of what I learned in NTM, I use every day in making investment decisions. And one thing that I particularly liked about the program was the diversity of classes that you're open to at Berkeley. So I spent a lot of my electives in business classes, and it really paid off because I use a lot of that in making decisions with imperfect information when you're doing investing. Understanding the regulatory pathway, and like Maxine mentioned, understanding how money flows through the healthcare system is really important when you're making decisions whether or not a company is hitting all the right milestones and would be a good investment. So great experience. I use it a lot in everything that I do. And yeah, passing it on to Jessica.
I think, but first, before we go to Jessica, and I was going to say the same thing too. So, thanks for asking the question in the chat there. So, Maxine's background was bioengineering. So, can you tell us just a little bit briefly, maybe 10 seconds about what your background was before you came in, and then Ziza, also yours.
Yeah, I did my undergrad in bioengineering and I went directly from undergrad to MTM.
Yeah. And she was an undergrad at Berkeley. And
Yeah.
Ziza's very different. So, share yours, Ziza.
Trained as a clinician, transitioned to academia at St. George's University School of Medicine. So prior to MTM, I functioned as a university lecturer, and then I got into the program.
Great. Thanks. I think Jessica's next then.
Right. Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's good to see some familiar faces and meet some new faces as well. I'm Jessica. I'm currently a fourth year medical student at UCSF. I graduated from the MTM program in 2021. So right after I graduated undergrad at UC Berkeley as a public health major in 2020. I think the benefits I got from MTM can kind of be put in two buckets. One of them is soft skills and feeling more confident in presenting myself and interacting and collaborating with others. I love to say one of my fun facts is I was the social chair for an all remote Zoom grad school program. And I think that tells people kind of a lot about my personality and how I am. We had a great cohort that was only able to meet remote. So I really hope for the cohort right now that has, in-person activities, really take advantage of being able to interact with your colleagues. And I'm still friends with some of my MTM colleagues as well. So those relationships will last you a lifetime. Apart from the soft skills of just, feeling more confident presenting myself and interacting with others, skills that have supported me are just when you enter medical school, you're kind of at the bottom of a very, very high hierarchy. I'm going into surgery, so that hierarchy gets even longer with the, increased time that people are in residency. But having a background of work that I completed, a project that I worked on that I was proud of, that I can point to things that I actually helped develop for the kidney dialysis catheter. That was the project that I was working on. It helps me feel more confident in my interactions with folks on this hierarchy. They're very curious about what this degree means, what do those letters mean, and what work did you do in helping develop this device. And also, I'm currently on a research year right now, a gap year before I apply into residency next fall. And my research is regarding surgical education. So a little bit like maybe more removed from the medical device design that I thought I would be doing, but I still incorporate components of my MTM education specifically for things like stakeholder engagement, interviewing residents about their needs for education and curriculum. And also the curriculum that I'm working on is for a self-retaining retractor that is used in surgery. So during surgery to keep incisions open, we use this tool called a retractor. Stays in place, keeps incisions open so med students don't have to be retracting the incision the whole time. And it's just a difficult tool to learn how to use. So I think I get, the side of my like med device kind of background brain gets like scratched by getting to work on this cool project and thinking about how we navigate ergonomics and how we teach the skill, but also just interviewing folks, understanding their needs and their backgrounds, and developing a curriculum that would best fit, the faculty who have trained a certain way, the resident trainees who are learning a certain way. It's all great work of how you can apply your MTM skills. You can apply them in different ways. And then finally, beyond medical school, between the MTM program and medical school, I was applying to medical school in the year after MTM, so 2021 to 2022. During that year, I worked as a clinical research coordinator. So a couple different pathways along the clinical kind of sphere of things. That was also a great experience where I applied skills from MTM, like interviewing, just program management, helping us move towards goals and deadlines, and learning more about how we take an idea from just a research idea to evidence-based practice. It's great to see everyone.
Thanks, Jessica. And Jaiwei.
Hi. So yeah, my name is Joy. Prior to coming to MTM, I had been in industry for uh like 8 years or so. So I think on the a little bit on the older side of the class coming in. I was mostly in life sciences consulting, and I had done some work in kind of like software development too. So a bit more like customer facing, bit more soft skills, I would say, but definitely like a good deal of like kind of technical work. My undergrad was in biomedical engineering, so I kind of had like a basis in that, but then did a bit of a career transition, I would say. So I think from there, I was kind of at a turning point in my career, trying to figure out like if I wanted to go more on the management side or kind of work at a bigger company. I had been doing projects for mostly pharma for a good deal of like 5+ years. So I figured like I really wanted to make a switch. I kind of make a decision that I wanted to make a switch. So for MTM, I chose MTM because of like the amount of like exposure to different material, but kind of like these frameworks, schools of thought. And for me particularly, I did like the idea of going to a startup. Um, I think the smallest company I had worked like at the time was maybe like 100. So it's relatively small, but when you are on the ground floor of a company, this is very different from even 20 people. So I kind of had come into MTM with that idea, and I took many classes that were, I would say, project based. There was like one class on like there was this deep tech class where you had essentially had a technology that you had to figure out what the heck this thing was, and reading patents, and then from there was like this other class for, I guess, understanding kind of what the customer landscape looks like. So I did a lot of those types of classes, and then ended up also doing this program called Nucleate, which I'm sure some of you have heard about. So I had actually met my co-founder in that program. He had kind of invented this technology, and I used a lot of the skills that I gained during the first semester of NPM actually, which was like this was a CRISPR-based technology. I had not really I've heard about it, but I didn't really understand kind of the fundamentals of it or the mechanics behind this enzyme. So yeah, some of the skills I gained directly was used to apply on how to figure out like what this thing was. Um, so from there, graduated. The company was spun out. We did a fundraising round, and then that is kind of what I'm doing full time today. Is I'm like the head of business development, so really thinking about all of our different customers. Where does this technology sit within the full kind of R&D cycle, but also in like clinical? So actually, like figuring out ways to like develop a market. Um, I'm currently in London right now. There was a conference, 2-day conference earlier today on cell therapy. The week before, I was in Italy for a molecular biology conference. So, founder life is kind of fun, but I have not been home for, uh, I think this summer I've been home for maybe 2 weekends. So it's getting to that point where like I don't want to do this anymore. Just the travel that means, but that's kind of what you get. So that's kind of what you sign up for.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. So I'd like to open it up now, the floor for questions. I think the last time I did this, I started out with like 2 or 3 questions that everyone kind of answered, but you guys already gave a great background, each of you. So are there any questions that folks want to put into the chat? I'd like to give you like a minute or so, or um, raise your hand and show your camera if you want to. If there isn't anything, then I'll move into some pre-prepared questions, but I'll just give folks a chance.
I feel like Helen's typing.
Ah, Helen says, Ziza, how do you convince hiring managers to take a chance on you for a new career path based largely on your MTM training when your track record and credibility still points to your past role? And how do you resist the pull of returning to what's familiar? So 2 questions there.
That is an awesome question. Um, Answering the first part of the question, a lot of what we learn at MTM is fundamental and essential in investing. You have to not only understand the technology to some degree, you also need to be able to evaluate it against trends in the market. And that's what you learn how to commercialize a medical device. The 2024 year, we didn't start the therapeutics track then, so we're mostly focused on medical devices. So yeah, it was a very interesting conversation I had with my now managing partner, then professor, because I got hired out of one of the Haas classes. I had a conversation with her on what I should do in the future because I think it was like March or getting ready to graduate, and I was trying to figure out like what do I do with a medical degree in this new role that well, not role, but in this new possible career path. And she mentioned that a lot of what I had learned in the past is the skills that you would want to use when you evaluate healthcare companies. And I really saw that as a way of leveraging clinical knowledge with understanding research and academic concepts, and then layering that with reimbursement, regulatory, and IP knowledge that you get from the MTM to be able to function as an investor to decipher whether or not some of the opportunities that we encounter is one that is a good company, a good fit, as well as a good team. Because that's the 3 things that you want to answer pretty early on before you make an investment. The second part of the question, let me see, what was it?
She said, how do you resist the pull of
Yes.
returning to what's familiar?
Yes. So that took me a few months to really get out of the scientific method of making a decision. coming from a clinician background and then doing the MTM where you do a lot of like science projects and engineering projects. You have a very regimented, sequential way of doing things. Like you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. That's like how you build a product. You do a prototype, and then you do an alpha, and then you do a beta. With investing, you have to do a lot of things in parallel. Everything has to happen at the same time because you want to get to a decision as fast as possible, because the more time you spend trying to answer a question is the more opportunities that are going to pass you by. So it took me a while to get to that point, and I had conversations with some of my managers about that. And I think that was one of the first critiques that I got that made me realize, like, okay, this is not medicine. This is not research. This is something completely different that has the same parts, but they're just built out in a different way. And I had to like learn to do them almost in parallel. You evaluate, you build out your models, you look at the market all at the same time so you get to a decision as fast as possible. All that being said, all of the tools that you use in doing all of that, you learn them at MTM. You do the market sizing, you figure out whether or not the need has a market that makes sense. You make sure that the business model is one that will have reimbursement that is able to ramp. You look at the regulatory path, whether or not it's something that it's likely to get approved sometime in the future that makes sense, and you figure out whether or not this opportunity has a tangible and viable exit. And these are all things that you learn in the MTM program. So I did have to unlearn some of the ways that I approach a problem, but the fundamental skills that you use to be a smart, I would like to say that smart investor, you get them in the MTM. Another thing that you kind of learn in some of the classes that are fundamental for the program, as well as some of the other electives that are available to you, is making decisions with imperfect information. And that is something that you do a lot. Some of the clinical trials that you encounter in these opportunities are just like preclinical. So it's just animal data. And you have to make a decision, oh, the data is compelling enough that it will be successful in 5 years' time. And completing the capstone and being the owner for some of the roles that you have when you do the capstone helps you to build those muscles as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Ziza. Arash has a great question, and maybe Jaiwei, you might want to jump in, but some of you also um, can comment as well. So Arash says that he would, I can't I don't know if it's he or she, but they were accepted as a finalist as a contributor at Nucleate. So what is some advice you can give to someone interested in getting experience before doing the MTM program?
Okay, so you're doing nucleate and then potentially going to MTM, if I get that correct.
That's what it sounds like, yeah.
Okay, so I think the my experience with nucleate was, I think I have some ideas about it. You have to really find a good project to be a part of, and that requires a bit of research and really kind of like a critical eye when you have those that list of projects that you will see. I will just caution that some of these ideas or projects are more ideas than actual tangible products or solutions, let's say. So find something that actually, like, you have to do some of your pre-research to see like, okay, well, there's this new type of drug class or something like that. Like, what is the actual disease state for that? Is there something that exists, or this is like totally untapped market space? Right? Maybe even seeing like which lab has popped it, like the person's idea is coming from. Because essentially how it works is someone has a technology or some IP generally from a lab. In some cases, it's like their own work outside of that. I would say those be cautious of those. Those may have not be more on the idea side. Um, and then yeah, I feel like the ones that do have some potential to them, there's more applicability throughout the actual program to gather just I would say value from, because a lot of the program is based off of like industry connections. The Nucleate has a big like web of industry professionals. They've been in industry and specifically on the science side too, for many years, and they have these like vast types of connections. So if you have a project that has maybe like some applicability with their scope or their expertise, that's just a better way to lean into that versus if you're just really on like the earlier stage, it may be hard to kind of gather some of their interests, just to be frank. So yeah, just really pick your projects carefully, and then if it is something that also you're pretty passionate about, I'll say that throughout the year, if you're doing nuclear, if you're doing all these other classes and you're doing MTM, there's going to be a pull on your time. And you're going to have to kind of make a decision on what you really want to spend your energy on. So if there's something that kind of drives from, just more than just interest, I think that's also a good way to just motivate you to put a bit more work into that. I'll say that in my nuclear team, there was like, I think we had started with 6 people. It was like myself and then 4 other Stanford MBAs. In 2 months, those 4 other MBAs did not show up to any of the meetings, and it was very clear that they were trying to do like too many things, right? So, figure out in the first few months of MTM, like kind of what you want to do, cash yourself out, but then make sure you only stick to the things that are actually like valuable and that kind of bring some either joy, but actual experience to what you're, trying to get out of the program. And yeah, so those guys dropped out. It was clear that some people were more interested than others. So yeah, definitely pick something that kind of pushes you a bit more.
Great. Thanks, Chai. We've got some other questions here. So Andrew asks, hi, Jessica. I'd like to ask, as an MD candidate, if I want to start my residency immediately after MTM, when or where would I realistically be able to apply the skills I gained from MTM, especially since most of my time during residency will be devoted to hospital-related work? Looks like actually, sorry, I didn't see that, Jessica. You did.
Oh, no, I was just asking some clarifying questions, but I can answer from what I understand about Andrew's timeline. It sounds like you're currently an MD candidate, so medical student, and will be applying into residency. You're taking a research year to complete the MTM program. That makes sense. All right. So the reason I ask is because after you complete the MTM program, you might need to go back to complete some clinical rotations, apply to residency, take one more year to, get reintegrated into medical school. I would say when it comes to residency, it kind of depends on what path you're going into. There are definitely ways to apply your MTM skills in probably every single specialty. I can speak to going into surgery. It feels like a really great fit because lots of folks in surgery are developing their own devices, therapeutics. For example, there's a surgeon that I work with. I believe he also lectures for the MTM program. Dr. Hobart Harris at UCSF is developing this I think he said it was like a surgical foam to help with wound healing. So it's a problem that he sees in clinical practice. He's developing a solution. So if you're able to connect with folks like that at your residency program, that's a great way for you to continue to work in this innovation space, potentially develop more research, which can be helpful for you in residency, later applying to fellowship in whatever your specialty is. But that being said, surgical residency is a 5 to 7 year residency program, with the difference between 5 to 7 years being 2 years of research in the middle. So for folks who have more time in residency or have more of a push to make sure they get research completed in residency, it seems like a better fit to continue with some MTM projects, whether that's connecting with clinician innovators at your residency program. It could be something like joining trainee-led organizations. For example, there's a medical student-led organization at UCSF called Cambria, and they're looking to connect with MTM programs, with health innovation, startups and companies all over the Bay Area to connect trainees and like clinical trainees with current like healthcare innovators. So those are different ways in which you could kind of hone your skills and continue to work in the space. If you are applying to something like internal medicine, something closer to like a 3-year residency program, I think you would need to be strategic in planning which residency program might I go to that gives me space to work on these skills because you don't have much time. And often folks who go into an internal medicine residency, they might be wanting to pursue a 2-year fellowship after that residency. So the turnaround time to get research done, build experiences while working full time as a doctor is very tough. So I think it's something most of your time will be related to hospital related work. You would realistically be able to apply the skills that you gain depending on if there are already structures in place at the institution you go to. So definitely easier at an academic center, definitely easier at programs that might be connected to a bioengineering school or to a healthcare innovation pathway program. Would be harder at residencies at community programs, for example, that might not have those connections in place.
Great.
Happy to chat more if you have specific questions.
Yeah, if you could, Jessica, if you could answer Samantha's question in the chat, and I'll take Paola, who's got her hand raised.
Sure. Samantha's asking what my undergrad background is. Did I always choose to?
Sorry, Jessica, I just meant if you could like type it into the chat, because then I wanted to, since we're kind of getting more short on time, I wanted to have Paola ask her question. Paola.
Hi. Thank you all for sharing your insights so far. I just wanted to ask, like, did you guys know what career path you wanted to go into as you started the MTM program, or did the program kind of help decide the career path? And if so, like, is there a certain class that sparked your interest in the career path?
I can take that one. I went into MTM, I guess, feeling pulled because my background in like Berkeley undergrad, it's very research focused. I didn't want to do that. It was actually funny because someone in my cohort told me I should try consulting. It was like a very direct, they were in my capstone group, and it was a very direct, you should interview for consulting. It was September, you should do it now. And so I think they gave me a lot of reasons to think about it. And I think the great thing about the program is that I was able to be exposed to a lot of people with different career paths and ask them questions. And so, like, I didn't know, but I did have an idea that I wanted to be more on the business side. So that's partially how you can answer that question, where I didn't know exactly where I would go, but there were definitely different job titles that I was interested in and that alumni and people in my cohort had. So I was able to get a lot of exposure to that. Um, so yeah, like short answer, I didn't know, but someone told me very, very directly that I should try consulting.
Great. Thanks. I'm going to jump back to Arash quickly, because this would be maybe helpful for a lot of other folks. So Arash states they have a bachelor's in microbial biology. Can MTM train them to branch out to careers in biomedical engineering, or do you need prior engineering experience during undergrad? I think that's a really good question. It depends on the title of the job, because sometimes if your background, for instance, is microbial biology, and you're going to like a drug company or a drug delivery company, then you could probably meld that into an engineering job title. Um, and so it depends on the company. Um, and if you know you want to, however, go into a biomedical engineering title that is actually in a device company in R&D and it's building prototypes, it's going to be harder because they're going to want to expect you to have like a mechanical or a bioengineering um, uh, bachelor's. So I think it depends. It's possible, but it depends. Any other comments on that for Arash?
Yeah, I have one thing. You can actually like very much tailor your class experience to have more engineering classes if that's something you're interested in. I personally went more business clinical, but I have friends who really went into the engineering and product development side of it. And so I think the flexibility of the program is something that is really interesting and does help a lot.
Great. Thanks, Maxine. Santiago.
Hello, guys. Just wanted to say thank you, Verna and Joy, for putting this together. Really insightful perspectives from former students. My question is actually for Jiawei, and I would like to provide a little bit of context on at least my background because I think it relates to overall what you did, and I kind of want to follow your footsteps as well. So I studied applied genetics and molecular biology purely at the University of Toronto, so I have a very science-heavy background. But during my free time, I didn't do any undergrad research. I spent my time at incubators trying to commercialize things and work on really, really exciting different projects. Throughout these experiences, I felt that my profile is more of the more non-technical co-founder that can also speak to science. I looked at the MBA programs, but they're very non-specific to medtech, and PhDs are for very technical co-founders. So my question to you, Jiawei, is someone with a more non-technical founder background, and as a CBO right now who went through the MTM program, do you feel that this is a program that would tailor to these preferences?
Okay. So I think it depends on the space that you're trying to play in. Um, if you're thinking about like, oh yeah, like the two big things in the Bay is going to be biotech and then regular tech, and then this kind of intersection of like tech bio, right? Which is kind of a new term. I had never heard of it before, but apparently it's a thing.
Yeah.
So it depends on that. So in my space, I sell a CRISPR-based assay for rapid DNA quantification. So the people that I talk to are PhD scientists generally, right? And I think, like I said before, like I was not an expert in CRISPR by any means. Coming into the program, I just barely heard of it. But I think a lot of the skills that you gain throughout the program, it allows you to understand technologies, understand really like if you have that background. So like I did biomedical engineering, I had worked in genetics, I like understand kind of like molecular biology. So I would say like it is pretty I'd say it is pretty critical to be at least technical enough to understand and have those types of conversations, but also if you can kind of back out and look at a bit more of like the business aspect of things, right? As kind of a non-technical founder, because the technical founders are really going to be like in the lab. So like the layout for my company right now. So we have essentially the inventor, Charles, myself on the business end, and then we had our first hire, which is he's been in industry for like 16 years. He's a PhD scientist from an analytics side. So they are in the lab, like essentially figuring out the advancements, the breakthroughs that we'll need to put our time and energy and our money, like most importantly, our money on. And then I am mostly talking to the industry, figuring out like really what are the biggest problems that are out there, quantifying, figuring out pretty much like what the requirements are around those, and then
Yeah.
essentially translating that to push into like our set of priorities for the lab, right? So I think for your question, like it's it is definitely critical to for me anyways, like I don't think I could have done this role without the training and some of like the exposure I had gotten through MTM. I think if I like were to come across this opportunity, I'd probably be less of a fit, honestly, to do that. And some of the a lot of this is confidence too. Like I probably wouldn't have a lot of the confidence I would even like to picture because you have to picture yourself doing something, right? So I probably wouldn't be able to picture myself like in this type of role with like some of the skill sets that I had before. All for like throughout MTM, it is a very dense program. I will say that too. So you will gain, I think like month over month, you will see many different types of like tools and frameworks that you can kind of acquire to your skill set. So I think yeah, to definitely MTM helped me directly with that. And some of the classes too. So the two classes that helped me directly were it was called Deep Tech Innovations, and then there was one called Lean Transfer. So those two essentially was like, how do you understand technology, reading like from the patent side is also a part of our, I think in the biotech tool space, patents are very important. If you don't have one, you are easily, someone's going to infringe and make something better. So that's the one. And then from the customer discovery side, like, okay, cool, you have a great technology, but like, who's going to buy it? And then if they're gonna actually buy it versus like if it's just something that like solves a very minute problem, right? So those are kind of the main classes that I took, as well as the fundamental MTM things that kind of led me down this path.
Thank you,
Great.
Jawei. And just a quick follow-up, or follow on to that question. Do you have any other tips on how we could potentially maximize our ROI within the program, specifically for people that are more interested on the business side, but still at the intersectionality of deep tech and business?
Yeah, you have to plan your classes pretty kind I wouldn't say like too far in advance, but I mean coming into the first semester, you probably should do a very deep dive into like all the classes that you can take. And then kind of build a little bit of a plan on because like what I think what a lot of people do is they'll load their schedule, like kind of overload their schedule for the first semester, and you'll probably end up dropping a few of those classes just because once you get in, the syllabus might say one thing, and then I don't know, like maybe the vibe is just different, or maybe the subject matter is like different. It really depends. So I would say like add a lot of classes to start, figure out, and then as you go through the first month, let's say, like really kind of be critical about like what is helpful, what is not. And if you have that end goal in mind, then it should be kind of easy. I mean, not, I don't know, I wouldn't say easy, but it should be easier to draw kind of a path of how to get to that point. And honestly, on Berkeley's and UCSF's campus, it is hypercritical to network as much as possible with not only the students but also different labs and different faculty. Like Ziza said earlier, the our teacher, I'm pretty sure it was Lisa. She was our professor, and I'm pretty sure Ziza did a great job of networking with her, right? And now she has a job. So just that type of caliber of people like exists on both campuses. It's a matter of it's your job as a student to figure out like who they are and then how to essentially connect with them.
Thank you
Great.
very much.
Okay, so I'd like to pivot back to our slides. And while I do that, I think there's something in the chat for Jaiwei, if he could answer, so that while I go back to slides, that if you see anything, um, alumni, if you see anything that's directly related, asking of you, then if you could answer that. So let me go back to sharing again. Okay, so Joy, you can take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Verna. So just as we close out, we want to let you know what are the types of career services and career development opportunities are available to you as MTM students. So we start more micro, like what is specific from MTM itself. So we are connecting you with our community of alumni. So we have over 300 alumni. I think after this year, we'll be over 400. So that community is strong. As you see, our alumni are more than happy to give back year over year um, in multiple different ways. So we host different professional development workshops that our alumni go to, especially we have industry panels and chats. So people from those different spaces that you're interested in learning more about will come back and be part of that. One thing that's really cool is we have affinity groups every year. So this is broken down, pretty much consider it like group mentoring for the year of an alumni who's in the space where you want to go. So we make these groups for you, and then you have access to these alumni mentors for the year. Um, There is one-on-one coaching. So Verna has a lot of experience, and she knows how to coach you and get you to think of different frameworks of how to position yourself to go after the jobs that you're most interested in. So not only do we do this, we also have different um, faculty and people connected to the program at UCSF. So every Wednesday we have career advising and capstone advising by specific mentors and different professionals at UCSF. Part of being in the program is that you have access to receive a travel allowance, a travel and professional development allowance to go to conferences and pursue certifications that will help you. Those are just some of the things directly in MTM. As part of the program, we also have access to the Fung Institute. So this is the group of folks that provide us with the boot camp leadership courses. So they have a group of dedicated career staff as well that you have full access to as an MTM student. And these are just some of the things that they offer. And then guess what? You're part of 2 world-class universities that also have more resources for you. So it's just one more step out, and you can see some of the resources available to you at each of the campuses. So just to bring it all home, like Verna will bring it all home for you. And this is our current group of 43 wonderful students.
Yep. So our students is really what makes it special. These will be connections that you'll make for the rest of your career. And again, emphasizing that these different diverse backgrounds go on to take similarly diverse roles after the program. And so whether you go straight and continue with a technical path, whether you pivot, and whether you pivot even later, some years down the road, your MTM alumni from your current class and from the alumni from all other classes will be here to basically help connect you to other possible career paths. So we'd just like to say that we'd love to have you consider us, and that if you have questions, of course, email us anytime. This email, mtm@berkeley.edu, is for both Joy and I. We try to get right on it, and applications are due January 7th. So please start your applications if you haven't already. Start them now and make sure that you get requests out for letters of recommendation, because that's usually where people end up getting hung up because they come in late, or a lot of times your managers, supervisors, or faculty are writing a lot of those. So it's good to get your requests out soon and make sure that you get strong letters of recommendation.